Visualize your whole body disintegrate and disappear. All the cells in your body disintegrate and disappear. All the organs disintegrate and disappear. What remains is just brilliant white light. Inhale slowly and deeply. Exhale slowly and deeply. Now bring your awareness higher to your thoughts and your emotions. Just observe each and every thought that comes to your mind and fades away. Mentally say, I am not my thoughts. I am not my emotions. Thoughts and emotions are just products of the soul. I am the soul. I am that I am. Visualize all your thoughts and emotions disintegrate and disappear. All your fears, worries, frustrations disintegrate and disappear. What remains is just brilliant white light. Inhale slowly and deeply. Exhale slowly and deeply. Now bring your awareness higher to your crown chakra. Mentally say to the Supreme Being, Divine Father, Divine Mother, to Grandmaster Chua Kok Sui, Lord Mahaguruji Mailing, and all the great, great ones, holy gurus, holy masters, saints, archangels, holy angels, and spiritual helpers. To all the masters of Theosophy, to my soul, my divine self, thank you for all of your priceless blessings, for divine light, divine love, and divine power, divine guidance, help, and protection, inner healing and physical healing, good health and happiness, prosperity and abundance, spirituality and illumination. Thank you in full faith. Inhale slowly, inhale all the blessings. Exhale slowly and be aware of your whole body. Inhale slowly. Exhale slowly. Inhale slowly, inhale all the blessings. And when you are comfortable, gently open your eyes with a big, big smile. Atma Namaste. Okay, let's continue with the book. So today we will start with some discussion about the astral plane, and then we will continue with some discussion about fourth dimension and also beings in the astral plane. I think we will finish there. We will continue with more studies about these beings and invisible helpers in the next session, and then we will finish the book. Okay. So this chapter will be a description of the nature, appearance, properties of the astral plane or astral world. So one of the most prominent characteristics of the astral world is that of full of continually changing shapes. We find there not only thought forms composed of elemental essence and animated by a thought, but also vast masses of elemental essence from which continually shapes emerge and into which they again disappear. Okay, so this elemental essence exists in hundreds of varieties on every subplane, as though the air were visible and were in constant undulating motion with changing colors like mother of pearl. So currents of thought are continually thrilling through this astral matter, strong thoughts persisting as entities for a long time, weak thoughts clothing themselves in elemental essence and waving out again. Now, in the book, on the solar system, we already discussed about the elemental essence, that they are in the process of involution, means becoming more mixed with matter. And then from the mineral kingdom, we start the path of evolution. Okay. Now, the astral, actually, the reason why the astral plane or astral body is called astral is because of having brilliant changing colors like starry light. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, this astral matter exists in 7 orders of fineness, corresponding to the 7 physical grades of solid, liquid, gas, and then subatomic and atomic. Each of these 7 orders of matter is the basis of one of the 7 levels, subdivisions or subplanes. It has become customary to speak of these 7 levels as being ranged one above the other. So the densest at the bottom and the finest at the top. Okay, so we have the diagram here. If you remember, every plane has 7 sub-levels, or every level has 7 sub-levels or grades of matter, from the densest to the in the bottom and the most refined on the top. Okay, but it doesn't mean that each of these only exists in their own level. Okay, so means the higher levels also exist in the lower level. Okay, like, you know, our physical body. We have this physical body, but the etheric body is both inside and outside of the physical body. Similarly, the higher levels of every subplane also exist in the lower levels. Okay, so nevertheless, it is substantially true that the bulk of the liquid matter of the earth lies in the seas, rivers, etc. above the solid earth. Similarly, the bulk of gaseous matter rests above the surface of the water. Although it's also inside, you know, gas is also inside water, but the bulk is above water, something like that. Okay, so similarly with the astral matter, the densest lies in the bottom, but the more refined is both inside and also extend beyond. Okay, so the 7th or lowest astral subplane penetrates some distance into the interior of the earth, so that the entities living on it may find themselves actually within the crust of the earth. The 6th subplane is partially coincident with the surface of the earth. So it means the 7th or the lowest subplane is like inside the planet Earth. And then the 6th subplane is like on the surface of the Earth. And as we go higher, it's like extend beyond the surface of the Earth. So the 3rd subplane, which is called as Summerland, later we will discuss briefly why it's called Summerland, extend many miles up into the atmosphere. The outer limit of the astral world extends nearly to the mean distance of the moon's orbit, so that at perigee, the astral planes of the earth and moon usually touch one another, but not at apogee. Perigee means the closest part of the moon to the earth. So it means that perigee, they actually touch each other, but apogee means the furthest part of the moon. So means the 3rd subplane of the third subplane reaches to perigee of moon, but not apogee, which is the furthest part. Now, the earth and moon are nearly 240,000 miles apart. Hence, the name the Greeks gave to the astral plane, the sublunar world. It follows that at certain times of the month, astral communication with the moon is possible. So the 7 subdivisions fall naturally into 3 groups. Group number 1, the 7th or lowest. Group number 2, the 6th, 5th, and 4th. And group number 3, the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. Okay, so the differences between members of one group may be compared to that between two solids, like steel and sand. But the difference between two groups is like solid and liquid. So it means like the difference between group B, which is the 6th, 5th, and 4th subplane of the astral plane, with group A, which is the 7th or lowest, is like between solid and liquid. But the difference between 6th, 5th, and 4th, which are in one group, it's like more refined solid and more dense solid, like steel and sand, or I don't know, rock and silk, something like that. So on the 7th subplane, the only persons who would normally awake to consciousness on that subplane being those whose desires are gross and brutal. Now, if you remember, we said the grossest is the 7th, and as we go to the higher levels, it's like more refined. So it means the grossest emotions belong to the 7th subplane, and as we go to higher subplanes, the emotions become more unselfish, more you know, higher vibration. So people who only perceive the 7th subplane, they have emotions are the grossest type or more brutal, like drunkards, sensualists, violent criminals, and the like. Subplanes 6, 5, and 4 have for their background the physical world with which we are familiar. Life on number 6 is like ordinary physical life, minus the physical body and its necessities. Number 4 and 5 are less material and more withdrawn from the lower world and its interests. As in the case of the physical, the densest astral matter is far too dense for the ordinary forms of astral life. But the astral world has other forms of its own. Subplanes 3, 2, and 1, occupying the same space, give the impression of being further removed from the physical world and correspondingly less material. Okay, so means if you see in that image, the 7th subplane of the astral plane is the closest to the physical. Number 6 and 5 is still quite, number 6 actually is still quite close to the physical, but as we go to 5 and 4, it's like more withdrawn from the material sense, and number 3, 2, and 1 are like even more withdrawn from the physical or material, you know, sense. So at these levels, entities lose sight of the earth and its affairs. They are usually deeply self-absorbed and to a large extent create their own surroundings, though these are sufficiently objective to be perceptible to other entities. Now we will talk about that, especially in subplane number 3. You will find cities, houses, and all of these are only astral. Means it's built by the imagination of the people. Although it appears to be very real, but it's not real. So here is also the Summerland. Subplane number 3 is called Summerland by the spiritualists, in which exist houses, schools, cities, etc., which, real enough as they are for a time, to a clearer sight are sometimes pitiably unlike what their delighted creators suppose them to be. Okay, it's like they are built by the imagination of, you know, others, by people. They have temporary beauty, you know, like sometimes there are this idea of heaven, not actually heaven, but after you die, if you are a good person, you go to this place and it has beautiful, I don't know, gardens and houses and things like that. it's just an imagination, and it's in the level, sub-level 3. It's called Summerland. So after a person is there for some time, then they may realize all of this is just imagination. It's not reality. And then the soul will move on to higher sub-levels and then to mental plane. So the second sub-plane is especially the habitat of the selfish or unspiritual religionists. Here he wears his golden crown and worships his own grossly material representation of the particular deity of his country and time. Okay, so you see, it's all built by the imagination. They are still not reality. So this is like the idea of heaven, but they are not the actual heaven. So after some time, the person may realize all of these are just imagination and then move on. And the first subplane is especially appropriated to those who during earth life have devoted themselves to materialistic but intellectual pursuits, following them not for the sake of benefiting their fellow men, but either from motives of selfish ambition or simply for the sake of intellectual exercise. Such persons may remain on this subplane for many years, happy in working out their intellectual problems but doing no good to anyone, and making but little progress. So it's like there are these people who are very fascinated by learning and intellectual, knowledge, but it's selfish. So they may decide to live there for some time, because in the astral world, they can actually study any book. They can go to any library. They can further investigate the intellectual problems or, exercises. And they may even influence their ideas on the mind of other people and then get a response back. So they may decide to live there for some time, and because they are fond of, still learning, but it's still selfish. It's not for the benefit of humanity. It's like selfish ambition of learning, something like that. Although we speak of astral matter as solid, it is never really but only relatively solid. So one of the reasons why medieval alchemists symbolized astral matter by water was because of its fluidity and penetrability. The particles in the densest astral matter are further apart relatively to their size. It's like gas. We believe that gas particles are further away from each other compared to liquid. Now imagine astral matters are even further away. So it's easier for two of the densest astral bodies to pass through each other than it would be for the lightest gas to diffuse itself in the air. So it means two astral bodies can actually pass through each other without influencing one another because of the distance of astral particles from each other. People on the astral plane can and do pass through one another constantly and through fixed astral objects. There can never be anything like what we mean by a collision. And under ordinary circumstances, two bodies which interpenetrate are not even appreciably affected. However, if the interpretation lasts for some time, as when two persons sit side by side in a church or theater, a considerable effect may be produced. So it means if two astral bodies are passing one another, there is no influence of one on the other. But if they stay interpenetrated for some time, then there may be some influence. Okay? An explosion on the astral plane might be temporarily as disastrous as an explosion of gunpowder on the physical plane, but the astral fragments would quickly collect themselves again. So in the astral plane, there is no accident. in the sense of accident in the physical plane. And there is no one, it's like nothing can be destroyed or permanently injured like how we have in the physical plane. On the astral plane, one never touches the surface of anything. Okay, like how in the physical world we touch surface of objects, in the astral plane it's not the case. So we cannot feel something as hard or soft or rough or smooth or hot or cold. But on coming into contact with the interpenetrating substance, one would be conscious of a different rate of vibration, which might of course be pleasant or unpleasant, stimulating or depressing. So if we touch like another astral matter, we don't feel it as hot or cold or rough or smooth or hard or soft. We just can sense a difference in vibration. So we may find it pleasant or unpleasant. Thus, if one is standing on the ground, part of one's astral body interpenetrates the ground under one's feet, but the astral body would not be conscious of the fact by anything corresponding to a sense of hardness. And on the astral plane, one has not the sense of jumping over, okay, but floating. You know how like ghosts are depicted in cartoons? They are like floating, something like that. Now, in the astral world, there is a diffused luminosity, not obviously coming from any specific direction. All astral matter is in itself luminous. Okay, actually that's why the name is astral. It's like starry light. Though an astral body is not like a painted sphere, but rather a sphere of living fire. It is never dark in the astral world. The passing of a physical cloud in front of the sun makes no difference whatever to the astral plane. Nor, of course, does the shadow of the earth, which we call night. Actually, there is no shadows in the astral plane because astral bodies are transparent. So there is no shadows, there is no darkness. It's always, there is a diffused luminosity all the time. And there is no such thing as a sleep in the astral world. If you remember, in 2 sessions back, we talked about why we need to sleep. And that was because of the tiredness of the physical brain. And in fact, it needs some time of separation from the astral body and the mental body. So in the astral world, there is no fatigue in that sense, and there is no such thing as a sleep. It is possible to forget up in the astral plane just as it is on the physical. It is perhaps even easier to forget on the astral plane than on the physical because that world is so busy and so populous. The astral plane has often been called the realm of illusion. Not that it is itself any more illusory than the physical world, but because of the extreme unreliability of the impressions brought back from it by the untrained seer. This can be accounted for mainly by 2 remarkable characteristics of the astral world. Number 1, many of its inhabitants have a marvelous power of changing their forms with protein rapidity. You know, if you remember earlier sessions also we said whatever you think, you can actually create, like you can change the form of your body by the will instantly. So all these inhabitants of the astral world has this power to change the forms, their forms. So therefore there is a possibility of illusion and also of casting practically unlimited glamour over those with whom they choose to sport. And number 2, astral sight is very different from and much more extended than physical vision. Do you remember we discussed that when we have astral sight is like looking at an object from all levels at the same time. So if a person is not trained, they may not understand the whole object. Thus, with astral vision, an object is seen as it were from all sides at once, every particle in its interior of a solid being as plainly open to the view as those on the outside, and everything entirely free from the distortion of perspective. So the sight is very different from our physical sight. It's like there is no perspective. Everything is visible at once. You know, like when someone is looking at a book, they can see all the pages at once, not on top of each other, but as though every page is seen individually. So if one looked at a watch astrally, one would see the face and all the wheels lying separately, but nothing on top of anything else. It's like you see everything at once. It is easy to see that under such conditions, even the most familiar objects may at first be totally unrecognizable, and that an inexperienced visitor may well find considerable difficulty in understanding what he really does see, and still more in translating his vision into the very inadequate language of ordinary speech. Now imagine you see something like that. It's even difficult to describe it because there is no concept of perspective, form, or whatever. Everything is seen at once. Further, astral vision discloses to view other and entirely different colors beyond the limit of ordinary visible spectrum. Note the ultra-red, the ultraviolet rays, known to physical science, being plainly visible to astral sight. So the colors that even are seen in the astral sight are very different from the colors that we know in the physical world. Thus, to take a concrete example, a rock seen with astral sight is no mere inert mass of stone with astral vision. So when physically we look at the rock, we only see a portion of the rock and we see it as like a physical mass. But when we look at a rock astrally, the whole of the physical matter is seen instead of a very small part of it. It's like you see the whole thing. The vibrations of the physical particles are perceptible. The astral counterpart, composed of various grades of astral matter, all in constant motion, is visible. The universal life, prana, is seen to be circulating through it and radiating from it. An aura will be seen surrounding it. Its appropriate elemental essence is seen permeating it, ever active but ever fluctuating. Now imagine when you look at the rock, you see all of this. So it becomes difficult first to understand and even more difficult to describe. So in the case of the vegetable, animal, human kingdoms, it's even more complicated. So therefore, there is a possibility of mistake, even when we look at numbers. So 139 may be seen as 931. So in the voice of the silence, three halls are spoken of. The first is the hall of ignorance, is the physical plane. The second, the hall of learning, is the astral plane. And nevertheless, it is still but the place of probationary learning. Now, why is called the hall of learning? Because learning in the astral plane is much more deeper than in the physical. And then we have lots of, access to different books and so many different, sources and libraries without the limitation of the physical. Still more real and definite knowledge is acquired in the hall of wisdom, which is the mental plane. Okay, so if you have studied the spirituality, you have heard about these three halls. So it's like as a spiritual person is evolving, we pass through all of these halls, from hall of ignorance to hall of learning and to hall of wisdom. So based on the book, the hall of ignorance is the physical plane. The hall of learning is the astral plane, and the hall of wisdom is the mental plane. An important part of the scenery of the astral plane consists of what are often though mistakenly called the records of the astral light. These records, which are in truth a sort of materialization of the divine memory, it's like a living photographic representation of all that has ever happened, are really and permanently impressed upon a very much higher level. Okay, so all of these are also in the astral plane. Means visible in the astral plane. Communication on the astral plane is limited by the knowledge of the entity, just as it is in the physical world. One who is able to use the mind body can communicate his thoughts to the human entities there more readily and rapidly than on earth by means of mental impressions. So in the astral plane there is no language, but communication is through the mind body, through the thought forms. Consequently, there are found associating there as here in groups drawn together by common sympathies, beliefs, and language. Okay, so that was all about the astral plane, the matter of the astral plane, and whatever is visible in the astral plane, and even astral sight. Okay, so now we will discuss a bit more about astral phenomena. Next chapter. Some applications of one or two superphysical forces may come to be known to the world at large. A common experience at spiritualistic seances is that of the employment of practically resistless force in, for example, the instantaneous movement of enormous weights and so on. There are several ways in which such result may be brought about. So we have heard of different spiritual powers, like one of them is movement of enormous weights or objects and so many other powers. So here it's discussing how this is possible. So number one, there are great etheric currents on the surface of the earth flowing from pole to pole in volumes, which make this power as irresistible as that of the rising tide. And there are methods by which this stupendous force may be safely utilized, though unskillful attempts to control it would be fraught with the greatest danger. So it means there are currents of etheric currents or currents of etheric energy from one pole to another, and this is like huge force. And if a person has the power and a knowledge to make use of this force, can gain certain powers. Number two, there is an etheric pressure, somewhat corresponding to, though immensely greater than, the atmospheric pressure. Practical occultism teaches how a given body of ether can be isolated from the rest, so that the tremendous force of etheric pressure can be brought into play. And number three, there is a vast store of potential energy which has become dormant in matter during the evolution of the subtle into the gross. And by changing the condition of the matter, some of this may be liberated and utilized. Somewhat as latent energy in the form of heat may be liberated by a change in the condition of visible matter. Now we will discuss about all of this more in this chapter. So this gives certain powers, even the power of changing, you know, like disappearing one object and then appearing it again in another place, something like that, or moving objects. Many results may be, number four, many results may be produced by what is known as sympathetic vibration. By sounding the keynote of the class of matter it is desired to affect. An immense number of sympathetic vibrations can be called forth. So if you remember, we said in the Grandmaster also says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, because the Word creates certain vibration. So through certain vibrations, and sympathetic vibration means by repeating a certain vibration, so the coming vibrations will magnify the initial one. Do you remember in physics we had the concept of resonance? So it's like if you create a certain impact in a certain rhythm, we can magnify the impact. So it's like through creating repeated sympathetic vibrations, we can create a certain immense power, something like that. So there seems scarcely any limit to the conceivable achievements of this force in the hands of a great adept who fully comprehends its possibilities. For the very building of the universe itself was but the result of vibrations set up by the spoken word. This is exactly what we just discussed. So it means different words create different vibrations. So if a person knows how to utilize that vibration and then set that vibration in a rhythmic order, so this is called sympathetic vibrations, then a great or huge, effect can be brought about. So the class of mantras or spells which produce their result not by controlling some elemental but merely by the repetition of certain sounds also depend for their efficiency upon this action of sympathetic vibration. So the use of mantras can create some effects like that also. But the person should be able to really chant the mantra correctly to create that vibration, because it's not actually the word, but the vibration created by the words. And it should be in a certain interval, in a certain rhythm. So the phenomenon of disintegration also may be brought about by the action of extremely rapid vibrations, which overcome the cohesion of the molecules of the object operated upon. A still higher vibration of a somewhat different type will separate these molecules into their constituent atoms. So it means that a person can actually disintegrate an object using extremely rapid vibrations and then can create it again. A body thus reduced to the etheric condition can be moved from one place to another with very great rapidity. And the moment the force which has been exerted is withdrawn, it will be forced by the etheric pressure to resume its original condition. Is that why we clap after exercise sometimes? Okay, now clapping is to disintegrate the dirty energy. Now what is discussing here is to disintegrate a physical object. Have you heard about this power? A spiritual practitioner who is highly advanced, they can disappear from one place and appear in another place. Or they can disappear one object from one place and appear it in another place. Yes, teleportation. This is something like that. So through the use of vibrations, they disintegrate the molecules from one place and then they move it in another place, and then when the will is released, it creates again in the same place or another place. I actually saw one person, he's a Sufi master, and he was sharing one of his experiences that his teacher disintegrated his body from one city and then appeared him in another city. And it was like mind-blowing. But it's possible through the use of extremely rapid vibrations. So the person needs to know how to make use of it with the will. Create extremely rapid vibrations so this object disintegrate, and then when the will is released, means like withdrawn, then the etheric pressure will resume that object to the original condition. Now, it is necessary to explain how the shape of an object is preserved when it is disintegrated and then rematerialized. If a metal key, for example, were raised to the vaporous condition by heat, When the heat is withdrawn, the metal will solidify, but instead of being a key, it will be merely a lump of metal. Okay, so that is what usually happen or normally happen in the physical world. When you heat a metal, let's say a metal key, it may become liquid, and then when the heat is removed, that again solidify, but not anymore in the shape of the key. Now, the reason of this is that the elemental essence which informs the key would be dissipated by the alteration in its condition. Not that the elemental essence can be affected by heat, but that when its temporary body is destroyed as a solid, the elemental essence pours back into the great reservoir of such essence, much as the higher principles of man, though entirely unaffected by heat or cold, are yet forced out of a physical body when the latter is destroyed by fire. Okay, so means when in a normal sense we heat this metal key, when the solid shape is disintegrated, the elemental essence will go back to this sea or ocean of elemental essence. Okay, so when the fire is removed, there is no shape anymore because the elemental essence is not preserving the shape. The elemental essence is back to the normal condition. Means that ocean of elemental essence, no more having a shape. Consequently, when the metal of the key cooled into the solid condition again, the earth's elemental essence which poured back into it would not be the same as that which it contained before. Imagine you have this ocean, okay? So how can I explain so we understand it better? So imagine you have a balloon full of water, and then you put it inside the ocean, and then you poke this balloon, all the water will go back to the ocean. Now, if you pour back from this water in another balloon, it's not the same water anymore because that initial water is already dissipated, you know, and mixed with the rest of the ocean, something like that. So means when this key which we heated became liquid and now we remove the fire, it becomes solidify again, the earth elemental essence which is poured back to create the solid shape is not the previous one anymore. It doesn't have the form anymore. But a man who disintegrates a key in order to move it from one place to another would be careful to hold the elemental essence in exactly the same shape until the transfer was completed. And then when his will force was removed, it would act as a mold into which the solidifying particles would flow. So means when a person who has the knowledge and power disintegrate the key from one place and want to create it in another place, is careful to hold that elemental essence in shape. So when he removes his will, and the particles will go back to the same shape. So thus, unless the operator's power of concentration failed, the shape would be accurately preserved. So it's like the person will make sure to preserve the shape. So apport or the bringing of objects almost instantaneously from great distances to the spiritualistic seances are sometimes produced in this way. For it is obvious that when disintegrated, they could be passed with perfect ease through any solid substance. Now, when you disintegrate an object from solid, it can pass through other solid substances. So you can bring it easily from one place to another. So the passage of matter through matter is thus when understood as simple as the passage of water through a sieve or of a gas through a liquid. So materialization, or the change of an object from the etheric to the solid state, can be produced by a reversal of the above process. In this case, also a continued effort of will is necessary to prevent the materialized matter from relapsing into the etheric condition. Okay, so this is one of the powers. Now, electrical disturbances of any sort present difficulties in either materialization or disintegration, presumably for the same reason that bright light renders them almost impossible, the destructive effect of strong vibration. So it means if there are electrical disturbances, it may create difficulty for the purpose of materialization or disintegration. Now, another one is reduplication, is produced by forming a perfect mental image of the object to be copied, and then gathering about that mold the necessary astral and physical matter. The phenomenon requires considerable power of concentration to perform, because every particle, interior as well as exterior of the object to be duplicated, must be held accurately in view simultaneously. A person who is unable to extract the matter required directly from the surrounding ether may sometimes borrow it from the material of the original article, which would then be correspondingly reduced in weight. So means if a person wants to reduplicate another object, they have to have this perfect mental image of that object to be copied, interior wise and exterior wise, and then gather astral and physical matter to mold that object. So all of these are powers that are gained if a person, gains knowledge and power in this, in the spiritual sense. Precipitation of letters may be produced in several ways. An adept may place a sheet of paper before him, form a mental image of the writing he wished to appear upon it, and draw from the ether the matter wherein to objectivize the image. Or he could with equal ease produce the same result upon a sheet of paper lying before his correspondent, whatever might be the distance between them. Okay, so means it's possible for a person who is in the spiritual path and has the knowledge and power, they can actually create a letter, how to say, for example, they have seen a letter, so they can recreate it. So they have to have this sheet of paper and then form a mental image of the letter that they want to create or duplicate to appear on the sheet of paper. So another power is levitation. So this can be created through different means. Number one is, so levitation means floating of human body in the air. So it can be created through different means. Number one is using spirit hands, which support the body of the medium. It may also be achieved by the aid of elementals of air and water. Now in the East, there is another way of doing it, which is by overcoming the force of gravity. Now gravity is this magnet, in fact, it has a magnetic nature. So it's like overcoming gravity, then the body can float. Doubtless, this method was used in raising some of the airships of ancient India and Atlantis, and it is not improbable that a similar method was employed in constructing the pyramids and Stonehenge. There is like lots of studies and research being done on how these huge, very heavy stones were moved to create pyramids and also Stonehenge. So based on the book, this might be the way they did it. By overcoming the force of gravity, they moved the objects or these stones from one place to another to create the pyramids or the Stonehenge. Okay, another power is feat of handling fire without injury. May be performed by covering the hand with the thinnest layer of etheric substance, so manipulated as to be impervious to heat. So one way is like the person may actually cover the hand with a thin layer of etheric substance, so when they touch fire, it's not affecting the etheric and the etheric portion of the hand and the hand. The production of fire is also within the resource, although there are other ways also to touch fire and not get burnt. But one of the ways is to cover the hand with a thin layer of etheric substance. So the production of fire is also within the resources of the astral plane, as well as to counteract its effects. There seem to be at least 3 ways in which this could be done. Number 1, to set up and maintain the requisite rate of vibration when combustion must ensue. Number 2, to introduce force dimensionally a tiny fragment of glowing matter and then blow upon it until it bursts into flame. And number 3, to introduce chemical constituents which would produce combustion. So another power to produce fire, and this can be done with 3 means. The transmutation of metals can be achieved by reducing a piece of metal to the atomic condition and rearranging the atoms in another form. So this is another power and repercussion which will be dealt with in another chapter. So we will talk about it in the next session when we are talking about invisible helpers. So all of these are different powers that can be possessed when the person grows spiritually and gain control over the etheric matter, the astral matter especially. Next chapter is about the 4th dimension. Now, what is the 4th dimension? Oops. Sorry, something happened. Okay, the 4th dimension. So what is the 4th dimension? There are many characteristics of the astral world which agree with remarkable exactitude with a world of 4 dimensions as conceived by geometry and mathematics. Now, what is 4th dimension? A point which has position but no magnitude has no dimensions. A line created by the movement of a point from one point to another has 1 dimension, which is length. A surface created by the movement of a line at right angles has 2 dimensions, length and breadth. A solid created by the movement of a surface at right angles to itself has 3 dimensions, length, breadth, and thickness. Now, a tesseract is a hypothetical object created by the movement of a solid in a new direction at right angles to itself, having 4 dimensions, length, breadth, thickness, and another, at right angles to these 3, but incapable of being represented in our world of 3 dimensions. Okay, let's look at one video to understand more about this 4th dimension, and then we will continue with the study. Okay. I'm not sure if you can hear the words. Can you hear the words? No. Okay. I think I need to. Mike?
So, the other day, I was doing my daily browsing of Wikipedia when I found this. It represents a 4-dimensional cube or tesseract undergoing a rotation along both the X, Y, and ZW planes.
Okay. Basically, you can Google this later, but you see, this is a 4-dimensional object. It's like a 3-dimensional object which is rotating in the right angle, like this. So it's like a movie. To understand it, it's like a movie. We are seeing, you know, it cannot be explained in 3 dimension because the 3 dimension is not moving. You just see one object in 3 dimension. But when we talk about 4th dimension, it's like you see it present, past, future. You see it, what it was, what it is, what it will become. Something like that. So it's very difficult to explain in 3 dimension. So that's why here it's being it's being explained as a movie, as a rotating, you see, cube. So this is what actually I wanted to explain. So when we have this understanding, you know, I think in the existence of God is self-evidence, Master Chakuktsui somewhere explained that it's like the concept of past, present, future experience simultaneously. So that is like 4th dimension, something like that. So we see what an object was, what an object is, what an object will be. Okay, so here is like this this table explain, like a point has only 1 point, a line has 2 points, a 4-sided surface has 4 points, 4 lines, 1 surface, a cube has 8 points, 12 lines, 6 surfaces, and 1 solid, and a tesseract has 16 points, 32 lines, 24 surfaces, and 8 solids. The video you just saw, something like that. It's like a cube which is moving in the right direction, like that, continuously. So there is a close and suggestive parallel between phenomena which could be produced by means of a three-dimensional object in a hypothetical world of two dimensions, inhabited by a being conscious only of two dimensions, and many astral phenomena as they appear to us living in the physical or three-dimensional world. Thus, objects, by being lifted through the third dimension, could be made to appear or disappear from the two-dimensional world at will. Okay, listen to this, then I explain. An object completely surrounded by a line could be lifted out of the enclosed space through the third dimension. By bending a two-dimensional world represented by a sheet of paper, two distant points could be brought together or even made to coincide, thus destroying the two-dimensional conception of distance. A right-handed object could be turned over through the third dimension and made to reappear as a left-handed object. By looking down from the third dimension on to a two-dimensional object, every point of the latter could be seen at once and free from the distortion of perspective. Now, what does it say is the reason why certain objects, it's like illusion, disappear, appear, a left-handed object become right-handed and everything is all because of different dimensions. Okay, for example, one of the examples is, like, for example, if you have a cube or if you have a cone, I'm drawing here, yeah. If you have a cone in 3 dimensions, okay, and then you observe it in a 2-dimensional surface, if you cut from here, you see a circle this size. If you cut from here, you see a circle in bigger size. If you cut from here, it's even bigger size. So a 3-dimensional object can be experienced in many different ways and sizes because in 2 dimensions, in a 2-dimensional surface, although it's the same object, right? So a 4th-dimensional object also in the same way can be experienced in many different forms and ways in a world of 3 dimensions. It's just because of limitation of sight. Do you understand? If we have a sheet of paper like this in a 2 dimension, if we fold it in 3 dimension, these two become much closer to each other, although here they are further away. So this is what discussed in one of these points, that if we have a surface and 2 points are very far away, now we rotate this, these two can become so close and actually even connect with one another. All of these are possible because of limitations of sight. So when a 4-dimensional object is experienced in 3 dimensions, it's like because of limitation of 3 dimensions, we may perceive it differently at different time. It may appear, disappear, it may be smaller, bigger, things like that, although it's the same object, but it's just our limitation of experiencing it. Okay? Now, I give you an example. Imagine you have a cube, okay, and then you have, you project light to it. Okay, so you have a cube. Cube is 3 dimensions, right? Now imagine you project light to it from this to this direction. The shadow created will vary, right? Now, experiencing this cube in 4 dimensions with its shadow is like seeing the cube and all the shadows at once. But experiencing it in 3 dimensions is like looking at it at any point of time. We see a different shadow. Like if the sun is here, the shadow is very small here. If the sun is here, maybe the shadow is bigger on the floor here. Okay. Now, experiencing it in 4 dimensions is like experiencing the cube and the shadows at all time, from morning till dawn, till night. Whatever shadows created on the floor is experienced at the same time. Something like that. I tried to explain the best I could. So similar tricks can be and are constantly being played upon us. Number 1, entities and objects appear and disappear. Number 2, upwards of articles from great distances are made. Articles are removed from closed boxes. Space appears to be practically annihilated. An object can be reversed, a right hand turned into a left hand. All parts of an object of a cube are seen simultaneously and free from all distortion of perspective. Similarly, the whole of the matter of a closed book can be seen at once. So all of these tricks can happen because we are experiencing an object which has 4 dimensions, even more dimensions, 7 dimensions, as a 3-dimensional object in the physical world. That's why all these tricks or limitations happen. But if we experience the object from all the dimensions, then we know that it's the same object. Similar to the example I gave for the cone. So if a 2-dimensional being wants to experience the cone, they may experience it in different sizes of circles. Only if a person can see all the 3 dimensions, then they know that this is the same cone. Similar. So a liquid poured onto a surface tends to spread itself out in 2 dimensions, becoming very thin in the 3rd dimension. Similarly, a gas tends to spread itself in 3 dimensions, and it may be that in so doing it becomes smaller in the 4th dimension. The density of a gas may be a measure of its relative thickness in the 4th dimension. It is clear that there is no need to stop at 4 dimensions. For all we know, there may be infinite dimensions of space. At any rate, it seems certain that the astral world is 4-dimensional, the mental 5-dimensional, and the Buddhic 6-dimensional. So it should be clear that if there are, say, 7 dimensions at all, there are 7 dimensions always and everywhere. There is no such thing as a 3rd or 4-dimensional being. The apparent difference is due to the limited power of perception of the entity concerned, not to any change in the objects perceived. So we have actually 7 dimensions. But because we have limitation of perception, in the physical world, we are only experiencing objects in 3 dimensions. If we raise our consciousness to the astral world, then we can experience objects in 4 dimensions. If we raise our consciousness to the mental world, we can experience objects in 5 dimensions. And if it goes to the Buddhic, we can experience them in 6 dimensions. It doesn't mean that the objects we are experiencing or perceiving are changing. It means our limitations are raising higher and higher, means less limitation. So the average man does not perceive the fourth dimension at all when he enters the astral plane. He realizes it only as a certain blurring, and most men go through their astral lives without discovering the reality of the fourth dimension in the matter surrounding them. Entities such as nature spirits, which belong to the astral plane, have by nature the faculty of seeing the four-dimensional aspects of all objects. But even they do not see them perfectly, since they perceive only the astral matter in them and not the physical, just as we perceive the physical and not the astral. Okay, so time is not in reality the fourth dimension at all, yet to regard the problem from the point of view of time is some slight help towards understanding it. The passage of a cone through a sheet of paper would appear to an entity living on the sheet of paper as a circle altering in size. The entity would, of course, be incapable of perceiving all the stages of a circle as existing all together as parts of at one cone. Okay, so means it's not, when they say fourth dimension is time, it's not actually time, but because it's like a sheet moving, you know, based on this example, if there is a cone and there is an object and there is a being, living on this surface, as this surface is moving from the top to down, this being experiences different sizes of circles. So that's why the concept of time helps us to understand it better. It's like experiencing the object, past, present, future. What it was, what it is, what it will be. The whole object at once. That's why time helps us to understand the concept of four dimension better. But it's not at the time in reality. Sorry? Repeat what? With four-dimensional sight, example. Okay. So imagine we have this cone as a three-dimensional object, and imagine there is a being living in two-dimensionally on this sheet of paper, which is cutting the cone. Okay? So let me draw this also three-dimensionally. Okay, so now it's like bringing what we are experiencing now one level lower. We are now living in a three-dimensional world, which is a physical world, and then we are experiencing four-dimensional things as a three-dimensional. Okay, now imagine we bring one step lower. Imagine we have an object in three dimension and we are living in a two-dimensional world, like we are living in this sheet of paper. Okay, so what we are experiencing, and imagine we have this surface or sheet of paper moving downwards from the top to bottom. So as this sheet of paper is moving downwards, our experience of the cone will change from a smaller circle to a bigger circle to a bigger circle. Although this is the same cone. Okay, so the same thing happened with us. When we experience a four-dimensional object as a three-dimension, tricks and misunderstandings happen because we are experiencing it differently at different times. Now here it says, time is not the reality of 4 dimension, but it helps us to understand it better. Because just as the example, when the sheet of paper moves from top to bottom, it's like it moves in a certain period of time. So putting time into it helps us to understand how this cone looks like. So it means if this sheet of paper is moving from the top to bottom, now if we calculate all the data, let's say this sheet of paper moved from top to bottom in 24 hours. So if we put all this data together, then we have some idea of how this cone looks like. Because we will have several sections, and then we put all these sections together, we will know how this cone look like in 3 dimensions. So if we have an object and then we look at it at past, present, and futures simultaneously, then we will have an idea of how that 4th dimensional object look like. So it's not basically time, but time, the concept of time help us to understand 4 dimension better. Is it clear? So with 4 dimensional sight, it may be observed that the planets which are isolated in our 3 dimensions are 4 dimensionally joined. These globes being in fact the points of petals, which are part of the one great flower. Hence the Hindu conception of the solar system as a lotus. Now, do you remember when we were studying the book Solar System, we discussed that if we have this hand, let me just stop share for a while. If we have our hand, I think I need to stop the background as well so you can see me clearly. Okay, if we have a hand like this, and then we put a sheet of paper on the hand, okay, where our fingers are touching this sheet of paper are the planets that we perceive. But these planets are connected with each other at the stem or at the, this arm. So this is what we experience, what the actual planets are. They are actually 4-dimensional. They are like petals of a flower. We experience them separated as the tip of the petals, but they are connected with one another at the stem. So that's why in Hindu conception, the solar system is symbolized as a lotus flower. It has petals, but it's connected. All these petals are separated as we perceive them, but they are connected at the stem as one flower. Something like that. Hard to explain. Okay, so that was the chapter of 4 dimensions. Now we will discuss about the astral entities, human, but then we will leave the non-human and the invisible helpers and the rest of the chapter for the next session. And next session will be the last session of this book. Okay, so what are these entities? What are the human entities? Astral entities, human astral entities in the astral world. To enumerate and describe every kind of astral entity would be a task as formidable as that of enumerating and describing every kind of physical entity. Now, all we can attempt here is to tabulate the chief classes and give a very brief description. So it's like we are categorizing different human entities in the astral plane. So we have alive ones and we have dead ones. So this is human, all the astral entities. We have human, we have non-human, we have artificial. So today we will focus only on the human and maybe if time allows non-human. We will leave artificial for the next section. So human astral entities also divided into two classes, physically alive, physically dead. Now, physically alive, we have ordinary person, we have the psychic, we have the adept and his disciple, we have the black magician and his disciple. For physically dead, we still have the ordinary person, the shade, the shell. We will discuss what are these. Vitalized shell, suicide and victim of sudden death, vampires and werewolves, black magician or his pupil, pupil awaiting reincarnation, and nirmanakaya. So we will discuss about this probably today. For non-human, we have the elemental essence, we have the astral bodies of animals, we have nature spirits, and we have devas. For artificial astral entities, we have elementals formed unconsciously, we have elementals formed consciously, and we have human artificials. So what are these? One by one. So in order to make the classification quite complete, it is necessary to state that in addition to the above, very high adepts from other planets of solar system and even more visitors from a still greater distance occasionally appear. But although it is possible, it is almost inconceivable that these beings would ever manifest themselves on a plane as low as the astral. But if they wish to do so, they create a temporary body of astral matter of this planet. Now again, if you go back and re-study the book Solar System, we said that at some point, especially in the beginning of life on every planet, so there were some beings from other planets who came down and they created bodies for themselves using Kriya Shakti. And these bodies are a bit different from the normal physical and astral bodies that we experience because they won't deteriorate. Okay, because it's like built through Kriya Shakti, through the power of thought. It's not natural, bodies. So secondly, there are also two other great evolutions evolving on this planet, though it appears not to be intended that they or man should ordinarily be conscious of each other. If we did come into contact with them, it would probably be physically their connection with our astral plane being very slight. Now, the only possibility of their appearance depends upon an extremely improbable accident in ceremonial magic, which only a few of the most advanced sorcerers know how to perform. Nevertheless, this has actually happened at least once. Okay, so it's very rare. So let's study these beings, the human class, physically alive. So the first class is the ordinary person. This class consists of persons whose physical bodies are asleep and who float about on the astral plane in various degrees of consciousness. So we discussed in previous sessions that when the body is asleep, the astral body is experiencing in the astral plane. So we use the astral vehicle to still experience the astral plane. Now, what is the consciousness in that astral body and what do we experience depends on the degrees of consciousness. Second one is the psychic. A physically developed person who usually be perfectly conscious when out of the physical body. So means these people are not only out of the body during sleep life, but also during awake, it's like astral travel, out of body experience. But for want of proper training, he is liable to be deceived as to what he sees. Okay, so whatever the psychic sees may not be exactly the reality, they may be deceived also. Often he or she may be able to range through all the astral subplanes, but sometimes he or she is especially attracted to one subplane and rarely travels beyond its influences. His or her recollection of what has been seen may of course vary from perfect clearness to utter distortion or black oblivion. As he or she is assumed not to be under the guidance of a master, he or she will appear always in his astral body since he does not know how to function in his mental body. Okay, so it means if the psychic is not under the guidance of a master, they may only use the astral vehicle to experience the astral world. But if they are under the guidance of the master, they may even use the mental vehicle and experience higher levels. The adept and his or her pupils. This class usually employs not the astral body, but the mind body, which is composed of matter of the 4 lower levels of the mental plane. So do you remember we said the 4 lower levels of the mental plane is called lower mental, and the 3 higher levels is called higher mental. So the adept and his students usually use the mind body, the mental body, to experience the inner world. The advantage of this vehicle is that it permits of instant passage from the mental to astral and back, and also allows of the use at all times of the greater power and keener sense of its own play. The mind body not being visible to astral sight, the pupil who works in it learns to gather around himself a temporary veil of astral matter when he wishes to become perceptible to astral entities. Such a vehicle, though an exact reproduction of the man in appearance, contains none of the matter of his own astral body, but corresponds to it in the same way as a materialization corresponds to a physical body. So means if a pupil or if an adept or his or her pupils are using the mental body to experience the inner world, they are not being visible to the beings in the astral world. So in case they want to be perceptible to the astral entities, they have to create a temporary veil of astral matter around themselves. Although this is not exactly their astral body, but it corresponds to it. At an earlier stage of his development, the pupil may be found functioning in his astral body like anyone else. But whichever vehicle he is employing, a pupil under a competent teacher is always fully conscious and can function easily upon all the subplanes. Okay, next class, the black magician and his pupil. This class corresponds somewhat to that of the adept and is like similar. So the adept and his pupil using the mental body experience the inner world. The black magician and his pupil is like correspond to the same. The only difference is the development has been for evil instead of good. The powers acquired being used for selfish instead of for altruistic purposes. So means the difference between the black magician and his pupil and the adept and his pupil is in the development of evil instead of good and the use of selfish instead of unselfish. Among its lower ranks are those who practice the rites of Abia and voodoo schools. Okay, so there are many different schools of black magicians, so among which is the voodoo black magicians. Okay, so we finished the entities in the astral entities who are physically alive. Now we will discuss about astral entities who are physically dead, starting with ordinary person. Ordinary person after death. We discussed this in the last session in detail. Now we just quickly go through again. This class, obviously a very large one, consists of all grades of persons in varying conditions of consciousness, as already described in the chapter life after death in the previous session. Okay, so it's like all the beings, all the human beings who have already passed away, They don't have a physical body, energy body anymore, but they have the astral body and they are still in the astral plane, continuing their evolution in the astral plane. Now, second class is called the shade. When the astral life of a person is over, he dies on the astral plane and leaves behind him his disintegrating astral body. Precisely as when he dies physically, he leaves behind him a decaying physical corpse. It's like when we die, although our consciousness is out of the physical body and now is using the astral vehicle, we still leave behind our physical body as a shell. So when we experience life using astral vehicle in the astral world, after some time, this astral body also dies. But the astral shade still remains until some time, until that astral shade also disintegrates. So it's like our physical body, which is left behind, disintegrate after years. This shade of astral matter also disintegrate after some time. In most cases, the higher ego is unable to withdraw from his lower principles the whole of his manasik, which means mental principle. Consequently, a portion of his lower mental matter remains entangled with the astral corpse. So, as physical plane or physical body, also physical plane has 7 subdivisions. The astral world also has matters in 7 grades. The mental world also has mental matter in 7 grades, and the lowest one is very closely connected with the astral. So means when the astral body also dies and the higher soul withdraws its consciousness from the astral body, a portion of the lower mental, which is closest to the astral, will remain with this shell, which is called the shade. This astral corpse, known as the shade, is an entity which is not in any sense the real individual at all. Nevertheless, it bears his exact personal appearance, possesses his memory and all his little idiosyncrasies. It may therefore very readily be mistaken for him, as indeed it frequently is at seances. It is not conscious of any act of impersonation, for as far as its intellect goes, it must necessarily suppose itself to be the individual. It is in reality merely a soulless bundle of all his lowest qualities. So means when the consciousness is already withdrawn from this astral corpse, a portion of the mental principle remains. And this shell, this shade, looks still somewhat similar to the person, but it possesses the memory and all the attitude and characteristics of the person. So sometimes when the medium is trying to contact with a certain person, they may contact with the shade and they may mistakenly think the shade is the person, but it's just the corpse. And sometimes some other entities may also go inside the corpse. This shade, like to trick the person. Third one is called the shell. Now, the shell is a man's astral corpse in the later stages of its disintegration. So this astral corpse, which remains, initially is called the shade, but towards the end of its life, when it's already being disintegrated, in the later stages of its disintegration, it is called the shell. Every particle of mind having left it, it is consequently without any sort of consciousness or intelligence and drifts passively about upon the astral currents. It may be reanimated for a few moments if it happens to come within reach of a medium's aura. Under such circumstances, it will still exactly resemble its departed personality in appearance, and may even reproduce to some extent his familiar expressions or handwriting. It has also the quality of being still blindly responsive to such vibrations, usually of the lowest order, as were frequently set up in it during its last stage of existence as a shade. Okay, so sometimes in this, when a medium is trying to contact, they may even contact with a shell, and they think it's actually the astral body of a person because it still resembles like him, but it's just the shell without any intelligence or consciousness also. It's just like a corpse. Okay, next one is the vitalized shell. This entity is not, strictly speaking, human. Nevertheless, it is classified here because its outer vesture, the passive senseless shell, was once an appanage of humanity. Such life, intelligence, desire, and will as it may possess are those of the artificial elemental animating it. This elemental being itself a creation of man's evil thought. A vitalized shell is always malevolent. It is a true tempting demon, whose evil influence is limited only by the extent of its power. Like the shade, it is frequently used in voodoo and black magic forms. It is referred to by some writers as an elementary. Okay, so it's like, looks like the shell, but it's used mostly for voodoo and black magic. It's malevolent, and it possesses artificial elemental. It's like an artificial elemental is animating it. It's not human, but it's classified here just for our knowledge. Okay, next one, the suicide and victim of sudden death. It may be noted that this class, as well as shades and vitalized shells, are what may be called minor vampires, because when they have an opportunity, they prolong their existence by draining away the vitality from human beings, whom they are able to influence. Okay, now, even the astral, shells and vitalized shells, shades, and all of this need energy or vitality to continue living, to prolong their life. So to prolong their lives, these astral entities may act as minor vampires, taking energy from the living human beings, with whom they become in contact with. And number 6, the vampires and werewolves. These two classes are today extremely rare. Examples are occasionally found, chiefly in countries where there is a considerable strain of fourth root race. It is just possible for a man to live such a degraded, selfish, and brutal life that the whole of the lower mind becomes enmeshed in his desires and finally separates from the higher ego. This is possible only where every gleam of unselfishness or spirituality has been stifled and where there is no redeeming feature whatever. Do you remember in last session, towards the end, we discussed that if a person really lives a terrible life, no unselfish thoughts, no spirituality, nothing, very brutal, very, like terrible life, the spiritual cord may be cut, and then there will be no contact anymore with the higher self. And this is like a bankruptcy for the higher self, because the incarnation didn't have any fruits at all. And then when this person dies, the astral body is like, there is no connection with higher soul anymore to receive energy and to continue its life. So it wants to prolong its life. It needs to get energy from other other beings. So they become like a vampire. And in that session, we said they are called elementary. Now, based on the book, if the person was like that, and the person is already put into like ground, like grave, if you open the grave and you look, the body still looks fresh. Doesn't look like decaying. And one of the ways to prevent this is to cremate the body, is to burn, so that there is no physical body anymore. Anyway, very rare. We just see them in movies, but the book mentions them. So I'm just explaining from the book. Next one, the black magician and his or her pupil. This class corresponds to the pupil awaiting reincarnation. But in this case, the man is defying the natural process of evolution by maintaining himself in astral life by magical arts, sometimes of the most horrible nature. All these entities who prolong their life thus on the astral plane beyond its natural limit do so at the expense of others and by the absorption of their life in some form or another. So in black magicians, sometimes just to prolong their life through black magic, they may get energy from others. So it's like at the expense of others and by the absorptions of their life. There was this movie, this reminds me of the movie recently played, I forgot the name. It was the same producer of The Shining, if I'm not mistaken, and there were these beings, these physical beings, that they would kill other people and get the life energy to prolong their life. So it like reminds me of them, but this is in the astral world, of course, not in the physical. And number 8, the pupil awaiting reincarnation. This is also at present a rare case. A pupil who has decided not to take his devachan, not to pass into the heaven world, but to continue to work on the physical plane is sometimes by permission only of a very high authority allowed to do so, a suitable reincarnation being arranged for him by his master. Even when permission is granted, it is said that the pupil must confine himself strictly to the astral plane while the matter is being arranged, because if he touches the mental plane, even for a moment, he might be swept as by an irresistible current into the line of normal evolution again, and so pass into the heaven world. So this is also quite rare. And the last one, the Nirmana Kaya. Nirmana means create, Kaya means body. It is a very rarely indeed that a being so exalted as Nirmana Kaya manifests himself on the astral plane. A Nirmana Kaya is one who, having won the right to untold ages of rest in bliss unspeakable, yet has chosen to remain within the touch of earth, suspended as it were between this world and nirvana, in order to generate streams of spiritual force which may be employed for the helping of evolution. I think this is a great sacrifice. If he wished to appear on the astral plane, he would probably create for himself a temporary astral body from the atomic matter of the plane. This is possible because a Nirmanakaya retains his causal body and also the permanent atoms which he has carried all through his evolution, so that at any moment he can materialize around them mental, astral, or physical bodies if he so desires. Okay? So we finished talking about astral entities of human nature. So in the next session, we will continue with astral entities of non-human and artificial. I hope you enjoyed. This was, I think, compared to previous sessions, a bit harder, but I hope the explanation was understandable. And you can always study the book more. You can always go back to the study of the solar system, because so many things we discussed is being discussed in the solar system a bit more. And if you have questions, please do share in the chat group that we have. If you have understandings and you think this can help others to understand more, or you come across some other, I don't know, videos or sources about the 4th dimension or whatever that you think can help the group, please do share so. And thank you so much. See you for the next session to finish the book on the astral body. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.